Hi, today we are going to study Napoleonic Europe from 1799 till 1815. Well, the first thing we should remark is that after his rise to power, Napoleon started to develop a group of domestic policies designed to bring peace on France. That's why he declared an amnesty for the exiled, the people that fought against the French Revolution and that were forced to leave France. They could come back. He suppressed all the rebellions against his rule, and also he normalized the relations with the Church, signing a concordat in 1801. A concordat, remember, that is a treaty between the Church, the Vatican State, and any other country. So France signed this concordat in 1801, by which Catholicism was considered the main religion of the French. If you remember, prior to this, the law regarding Catholicism was the civil constitution of the clergy that recognized that Catholicism was actually considered another religion similar to the Jewish religion or the Muslim religion, which led to a lot of problems between the new revolutionary state and the Catholic Church. Also, Napoleon, under his rule, it was created what has been known as the Napoleonic Code. The Napoleonic Code was a compilation of all the laws that existed in France. Also, he declared himself emperor in 1804. The main European powers, such as Britain, Austria, and Russia, allied to fight against Napoleon, as they believed that Bonaparte was the incarnation of the French Revolution values, and they preferred that France return to absolutism. So Napoleon built an empire of dependent states on fighting these wars against the European countries, and this was the origins of his. Right, in this map we can see the Napoleonic Empire. We can see in green the lands that corresponded to the Napoleonic Empire. We can see some in Italy, some obviously in France, in the Netherlands, and also some in the current Croatian coast. Also in light blue we can see what were the dependent states, which were states theoretically independent from France, but whose rulers were dependent on Napoleon's orders. In this case, we can see the Kingdom of Spain, obviously, that was ruled by Napoleon's brother, and we will explain later how this happened. Also, the Confederation of the Rhine in Central Europe, Switzerland, the Kingdom of Italy. Remember that Italy wasn't already created as a state, so the Kingdom of Italy was the northern part of the current Italy. Also, the Grand Duchy of Warsaw. And then the allies of France, which were the Kingdom of Norway and Denmark, Kingdom of Prussia, and the Austrian Empire. What left some important countries against the rule of Napoleon. For example, the Kingdom of Portugal and the Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, which were traditional allies. Actually, Portugal was more or less dominated by Britain. Also, opposed to Napoleon was the Russian Empire and also the Kingdom of Sweden. In order to stop after having the control of all Europe, Napoleon wanted to control Britain, but he realized that as Britain had this powerful army, he wasn't going to be able to control. It was going to be very difficult to control Britain, so he decided to block British trade instead, in order to try to stop Britain's sea power, and that's why Napoleon created the continental system in 1806. The main aims of the continental system, I've explained that it was a blockade on Britain. The main aims, as I said, were to stop European countries from trading with Britain. The main countries allied to France, who in this case were Austria, Russia, and Prussia, as Napoleon had started to conquer the whole Europe. Probably they became allies of France because they feared that if not, what the consequences of not being allied of France. So Denmark collaborated with the French, and British bombed their ports. And then, as we explained, as a natural ally of Great Britain, Portugal refused to form part of the continental system, right? This is a map in which we can see how the continental system affected or left outside the trade of Europe to the United Kingdom outside the trade of Europe. We can see the red line that marks the countries included in the continental system, and the UK and Portugal mainly outside this continental system. Well, France tried to attack, decided to invade Portugal and then asked permission to cross Spanish territory and invade from there the country that wasn't collaborating in the continental system. And the Spanish crown accepted this requirement, but the French troops remained in Spain instead of just going to Portugal. They remained in Spain, and then Napoleon appointed his brother King of Spain, Joseph I. This started a war in 1808, and that it was going to be the independence war that was declared by the mayor of Móstoles the 2nd of May 1808, and it was going to last until 1814. Another consequence of Napoleon's ideas was or actions were was actually the rise of the German nationalism. We need to remember that prior to Napoleon's rise to power, the territory that is nowadays Germany comprised a lot of different countries, independent countries that had the same culture and the same language, the German, and that were independent. And prior to this, the only big state that remained was known as the Holy Roman Empire. But Napoleon suppressed the Holy Roman Empire and changed it by direct influence of the French. So the population and the leaders of these zones developed this German nationalism mainly against the French rule and the French culture that was being imposed in those lands. One of the consequences of this German nationalism was going to be the unification of Germany in the last third of the 19th century. So, being in Europe, the alliance system as it was, in 1810, Russia withdrew from the continental system. Then Napoleon, at the beginning, Napoleon sent his Grand Army to Poland, not declaring war on Russia, but obviously he sent his troops to Poland as a sign of what was going to happen. And then in 1812, the French troops invaded Russia. Russian troops retreated, burning and destroying the countryside left behind in order to avoid the French troops to use the crops and so on to feed the animals and the armies. The French took Moscow, but when they were there, the winter began, and the French army decimated because they weren't accustomed to the temperatures of the Russian winter. So they retreated. Napoleon lost here almost his entire army. And in 1813, Wellington in Spain. We have Wellington in Spain, Russia confronting France, and Austria, Prussia, and other German states allied with Russia against the French rule. In 1813, Napoleon lost the Battle of Leipzig, and in 1814 he abdicated. The same year, Louis XVIII signed as the King of France. The new King of France signed the Treaty of Paris. France went back to its 1792 borders, and with this, the French had ended. This is a recreation of how probably the winter affected the Napoleonic troops in Russia. This is a recreation of the Battle of. And then Napoleon was exiled to Elba, and he escaped from his exile, and then he led a new army. He came back to France, he led a new army, and in what has been called the 100 Days Empire. This empire was defeated in the battle, definitely defeated in the Battle of Waterloo. Napoleonic troops were defeated there, and Napoleon was forced to exile in Saint Helena, an island in the South Pacific, and in this place he died, and his presence in history came to an end.